Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be reading more of Beware the Claws That Catch Alice, written by Christina Henry. Where we last left off was chapter 8. But before we begin, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and as always, my dear friends, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax, and let's get to it. Chapter 8. Alice blinked in astonishment. But I don't remember. I don't remember that at all. But thank you for telling me. Thank you for letting me know I didn't imagine it. Cheshire seemed disappointed. At all? Not a spick, not a speck, not a shadow. Something sharp sinking into something soft and a man screaming. No, she said, with as much guile as she possessed. Cheshire peered at her very closely. She had the uncomfortable feeling that he was trying to look past her eyes and into her brain, trying to search and find that fragment of memory so he could snatch it away, good or bad or broken. Her memories were her own, and Cheshire had no right to them. After a long moment, Cheshire grinned. Just because there is nothing there now doesn't mean there won't be in the future. What if we agree that you owe me that memory when it returns to you? Hatcher shook his head at once, short and sharp. No, I won't have Alice owing you anything. Cheshire smiled wider, very well pleased now and showing it. Oh, you won't have it, will you, Nicholas? Perhaps the rabbit's little toy now belongs to Hatcher of Heathtown. She told you she belongs to nobody, and she told you true, Hatcher said, though his eyes flickered a little when Cheshire called him that name. The rabbit doesn't think so. The rabbit says he marked her and she is his, Cheshire said. That's more than enough, Hatcher said, pushing away from the table. You don't know where the sword is, so you're of no use to us. Your manners did not improve in your cage, Nicholas, Cheshire said. You are my guest, and a very poor one. You didn't even eat any of my cakes. He raised a finger, almost as if he were testing the wind. Then the scent of roses was abruptly stronger, overpowering. Alice coughed as thick perfumed filled her throat like fog. Two things happened at once. The roses set in vases around them shot from their containers like spider's silk, impossibly long, as if their stems had not been cut at all. At the same time, Hatcher pulled something from his coat. It was not the axe, as Alice had expected, but it was the gun, the forbidden weapon. She had nearly forgotten he carried it. Cheshire croaked his finger down, in the shape of a hook. The roses halted mid-air in their flight. For the first time since their arrival, Cheshire did not seem smug or in control. His left eye twitched as Hatcher pushed the gun very close to Cheshire's face. The very idea of the gun made Alice nervous. Hatcher wasn't supposed to have it, and it was too easy for an accident to happen. When you used a knife or an axe, you had to think. You had to be deliberate. If Hatcher's finger twitched, then it wouldn't matter if he meant to kill Cheshire or just frighten him. The little man would still be dead. Your manners most definitely did not improve, Cheshire said. I could have Theodore run to a copper. You would be hanged on the spot for holding that. You would be dead whether the copper came or not, Hatcher said. Alice did not like this. This was not going as it was supposed to at all. Cheshire liked Bess, and so was to be disposed to help her grandson. They were not supposed to be threatening the person who has or was to provide them help. Hatcher's temper was short, and if he saw red, as he did with the carpenter's sentries, then there was sure to be a tragedy. If Cheshire were killed, then who would move in to take over his territory? A monster like the walrus? Certainly whoever moved in would think nothing of selling girls. The women of Cheshire's district were likely safer here than they would be elsewhere. Finally, despite all their bravado, they had no clue where to look for the sword, and Cheshire did. They needed him, like it or not. Alice reached for Hatcher's hand, not the one that held the gun, but the other, and gave it a soft squeeze. That's quite enough, Hatch. He stared at Cheshire a moment longer, and Alice was certain he would pull the trigger. Instead, he exhaled slowly as he hid the weapon under his coat. Cheshire grinned again, his default expression. Alice felt a nearly overwhelming urge to slap that smile, to break the perfect line of two white teeth. That will be enough to be getting on with, he said. The two of you have given me a lovely morning's entertainment. I'm so pleased I told Theodore to let you in. Alice and Hatcher glanced at each other, baffled. Cheshire appeared unaffected by the events that had just occurred. The roses slid slowly back inside their vases, harmless flowers once more. He reached for another cake and stuffed it in his mouth, talking through the crumbs. Oh yes, a lovely morning's entertainment. And now I know something the rabbit does not know. Will you tell him? Alice asked. She disliked the hesitant tone in her voice and the tiny little hiccup of fear. Cheshire waved his hand. Oh no, why would I do that? Then he would know too. And it's so much more fun when I have something he doesn't. His streets press right up against mine, just to the west, and sometimes his lads come in at night and take my girls from their beds, though it's hard to prove the ruffians on all sides. I don't know why they're all so crude, so I will enjoy knowing that his girl, Alice, is walking free and he's ignorant. For the last time, she's not his girl. She's mine, Hatcher said. Of course, Cheshire said soothingly. His manners were completely different from before. He was friendlier, and apparently took no offense at Hatcher's waving a gun in its face, though I wouldn't mind being there when you tell him that. Oh yes, I would enjoy that indeed. His green eyes gleamed just like a cat in the dark, Alice thought. Now as to your question, Cheshire continued, my knowledge of the sword ceases with the story of the magician and the formation of the Jabberwocky. However, there are many collectors in the city. Collectors? Asked Alice. Yes, they collect things that are interesting or precious. The rabbit is one, you know. He collects many things, pretty things, and rare things, and you are one of those pretty and rare things, my girl. So you keep out of his sights, for he wants you back in his collection, and he won't let you get away again. It's strange, Alice thought. It's almost as if he's warning me, like he cares what happens. I don't like these men that scoop up girls and use them for their own purpose, Cheshire said. I try to keep the girls in my district safe. I keep them safe by knowing more about these men than they know about themselves. But I am, alas, a rare breed. Do you know of the walrus? Alice asked, thinking of what Dolly said. Whatever you have heard is not only story, Cheshire said, and there was no hint of playfulness now. He eats as he defiles them, and I cannot imagine a worse fate. You would be better off in the rabbit's collection than taken by the walrus. I won't let him take her, Hatcher said. You are very much a man, Nicholas, Cheshire sighed. But you were not able to protect Jenny. Though you were younger then, it is true, and there was deceit. This time a spasm went across Hatcher's face at the mention of Jenny. Alice wanted to ask who Jenny was, if he remembered, but she did not want to do so in front of Cheshire. He was too unpredictable. But that is old business. We are concerned with this moment, and at this moment the Jabberwocky is walking the streets. Now, the craftiest collector of all is the caterpillar. If the blade is in the old city, then he will know. He may even have it, which would certainly make your task simpler. Although, if he does have it, he may not want to give it up. Everyone has a price, Hatcher said. Yes, but can you pay it? Cheshire asked. The caterpillar is not as interested in simple coin as some might be. Where will we find him? Hatcher asked. His streets are north of mine. Most nights he can be found at an establishment he calls Butterflies. You may imagine what kind of establishment that is, Cheshire said, and now, while this has been very amusing, you must run along. I have much business, and you are delaying me. His attitude was again different from what it had been a moment before. Now he was brisk, waving them out of the parlor and back into the small foyer. Before they realized what had happened, the door to the parlor closed behind them with a firm click. Alice and Hatcher looked at each other, and Alice saw the confusion she felt reflected on Hatcher's face. What had just happened? Had Cheshire helped them or harmed them? It certainly seemed that he had obtained more information from them than they had from him. He appeared genuinely concerned for Alice's safety from the rabbit and other predators from the old city, yet at the same time he was not a friend. He could not be relied upon to assist them unless he could gain by it. The guard, Theodore, waited there, and Alice thought he seemed pleased about something. This way, Theodore said, leading them through an extraordinary hallway. It was patterned all over in black and white tiles, ceiling and floor and walls. Looking at it made Alice sick and dizzy, and she already felt a bit ill from the heavy blanket of roses in the parlor air. "Why are you taking us this way instead of the way that we entered?" Alice asked. "Mr. Cheshire has important visitors coming and doesn't want rabble like you crossing them on the step," Theodore said. Alice wanted to take offense at the rabble designation, but it didn't seem important enough to bother with. Besides, they hardly appeared presentable in their dirty and blood-stained clothing. She had a feeling Theodore would enjoy using that silver wire he carried on them, and she wasn't interested in providing him motivation to do so. She glanced over her shoulder at Hatcher. He frowned fiercely, like he was trying very hard to remember something. He likely had not heard what Theodore said. The hallway went on, much longer than should be possible for such a small house. Far at the end, there was another white door, like a house full of teeth, Alice thought. Teeth in every doorway, waiting to bite. Theodore stepped to one side and indicated they should exit that way. Alice turned the knob and opened the door. Outside, the glare of the sun was surprisingly strong, and for a moment she was blinded. Then Hatcher pushed into her back, and she tumbled to the ground. The door closed very firmly behind them, and Alice heard the lock turn. She rolled to her back, ready to snap at him for pushing her, but stopped when she saw large rose bushes, taller than Hatcher, rising up from the ground. Hatcher reached down to help her. "He pushed me out the door. That guard, I think he didn't want us to get a good look at what was out here." "Where are we?" Alice asked, staring around in wonder. "This can't be Cheshire's garden." The bushes grew above them and stretched on in the distance, much farther than should have been possible. There was an intersection in distant, turning going left and right. There was no sign of the city, the buildings that surrounded the cottage, the noise of the street. It didn't even smell the same. The air was clean and fresh, and the roses were lightly perfumed. The air, instead of clawing at Alice's nose and throat, the sun was so bright compared to the dreary old city that it hardly seemed to shine on the same world. This is Cheshire's idea of fun," Hatcher said. Alice studied the passage before them for a moment. "It's a maze." "Yes, and I'll wager anything we're trapped in here until we solve it," Hatcher said. He turned back to the white door and gave it a hearty kick, strong enough to rattle the panes of glass in the windows. "We haven't time for this, Cheshire!" Hatcher shouted. "Have you forgotten about the Jabberwocky?" There was no answer, although Alice thought she heard the faint sound of laughter in the wind. "This is the price for what he told us," Alice said. "He must be a magician himself, Hatch. How else could this be? And we saw what he did with the roses inside." Hatcher shook his head. "He's not a magician. I told you, a magician built Rose Way. Whoever built it must have added this maze, and Cheshire is simply taking advantage." But doesn't he need magic to manipulate the space? Alice asked. I don't know much about magic, Alice, Hatcher said. You would likely know more than me. Don't repeat that nonsense, Nell said. She said, irritated. Why not? You did something in that tavern. They all saw you. I felt the Jabberwocky leave, and he wouldn't leave unless he was forced. What if he simply found better prey elsewhere? Alice asked. She did not want to believe that she had the power to send something so horrible away. She did not wish to be any more interesting, as Cheshire had said, than she already was. Hatcher did not say anything more. That wasn't his way. He walked away and into the maze, expecting her to follow. He would not stand and argue with Alice, and when they did not agree, even if she wished to, and she did wish to, they had left the hospital, and since then she had felt as though she were buffeted in a rushing river, pulled along by the force of the water and knocking up against everything in her path. There had hardly been a moment when she felt her fate was in her own hands. She did not wish to be a magician and to draw attention from those who would seek to exploit her. Alice was no fool. Even if she had been muddled for a time, if anyone thought she as a magician, and Alice did not believe she was, then even Hatcher's skills would not keep her safe. She would be scooped up by a boss and presented as a curiosity to the discerning men who frequented the old city looking for excitement. If a boss did not kidnap her, then the government would. It was illegal to practice magic in the city, to be a magician. Alice did not know how Cheshire managed to keep the government's interest out of Rose's way. He must have knowledge that the men in power would not like revealed. As she thought all of this, she automatically wandered behind Hatcher, and that irritated her as well. She realized she did it. She should not follow him like a frightened dog, but you have acted like a frightened dog, especially at the beginning. Altogether, she was feeling very bothered and not at all scared, although she supposed she ought to be scared. They were trapped in a maze of magical rose bushes, and had no way of knowing how long it might take to get out. Her face was hot and gritty from the soot-stained fog they'd passed through in the night. The bright sun would have been a welcome relief from the dark warren of the old city, but in this exposed maze it was another irritant. Though the rose's scent was not as thick and heavy as inside, there was no escaping the perfume. Alice was tired of roses, tired of walking. She sat down in the middle of the maze, crossed her arms and legs, and waited to see whether Hatcher would notice. Almost immediately he turned around and gave her a questioning look. What are you about, Alice? Are you hungry? No, she said and lifted her chin. I've had enough. I'm not moving one more step. We have to get through this maze, Hatcher said, gesturing ahead of him. They were in a long tunnel with several turnings off the main thoroughfare ahead. We've no idea where to turn or how to get out, and Cheshire is likely sitting in his parlor laughing at us. I'm not an amusement for him. I'm not a toy, she said hotly, thinking of the term he'd used for her. No, you're not a toy, he said, but I think I can find our way out of this, if you let me try. Why? Alice asked. This isn't like the old city, where you're retracing your steps from long ago. You're just guessing, same as anyone would. Hatcher walked back and crouched on the ground in front of her. He stared hard into her eyes. What happened to my quiet, trusting girl? She was drugged, Alice said, thinking of the powders that the hospital had put in her food for 10 years. She's not anymore. Hatcher's eyes lit up. That's it, Alice. The powders. What about them? Alice asked. She was confused by the sudden change in his manner, and the way it undermined her rebellion. The powders kept your magic inside you, Hatcher said, grabbing her hands and pulling her to her feet. If you hadn't been taking them all those years, you would have known you're a magician long ago. Hatch, stop, Alice said, tugging her hands away and planting her feet. I'm not a magician, and she leaned close to his ear, a sudden flash of inspiration. If I were a magician, you wouldn't want everyone to know about it, would you? You wouldn't want Cheshire to know about it, so you should stop talking about it so loud. We don't know who's listening. He could be watching us, hearing everything we say. He very likely is. He already thinks you are a magician, whatever we say, Hatcher said. Why do you think he was so interested that you knew the story of the Jabberwocky? What's that to do with anything? Alice asked, confused again. Every time she thought she'd caught up, she fell behind again. It's not a well-known story he told. You could tell by the way he told it that he was certain we'd never heard it before. Hatcher said, Who told you that story? Your mother? Yes, Alice said. Where did she learn it from? Alice shrugged. Her parents, I suppose. Hatcher nodded. Who learned it from their parents, and so on. Did your family always live in the new city? I suppose. Sorry about that, everyone, but let's get back to the story. I suppose so, Alice said. I never learned otherwise. Alice, Hatcher said, his brows drawn together. I can't feel the Jabberwocky in here. Alice might be less befuddled than before, but Hatcher's brain was just as twisty as always. She sighed and took his hand, and they walked along the path carved between the rose bushes. She thought that it was a good thing if Hatcher and the Jabberwocky were less connected, even if it were only temporary. At all the junctions of every turning, Alice peeked into the opening, each time hoping for some clue to the exit, but the maze was always the same. They decided to stay on the main path. After all, Alice reasoned, it must come to an end somewhere. And when we reach that end, you can simply cut through the bushes. The leaves behind her rustled, and Alice spun around, for there was no wind. 2 vines exploded from the maze wall and wrapped around her ankles. The vines tugged sharply, and she fell hard to the ground on her back. Before she or Hatcher could do anything, she was pulled along the grass, and the roses closed around her. And that is the end of chapter 8, my dear friends. Tune in next video to hear what happens in chapter 9. This has been Ruby, signing off.